So welcome, everybody. I'm Jim Gavin, and along with Marilyn Aziz of the Center for Human Relations and Community Studies, we want to thank you for joining us tonight. Some of you may know, and a lot of you may not know, that the Center for Human Relations is the longest standing center at Concordia University and has been offering human development and professional development programs for over half a century. That's a long time. Tonight, we joyfully welcome back Dr. Abound Gilpin-Jackson, who among so many other accomplishments, is the author of the highly acclaimed book, Transformation After Trauma, The Power of Resonance. This book offers a trauma-informed narrative development pathway that's relevant to all levels of systems supporting people post-trauma. Abound is a multiple award-winning scholar practitioner in human organization development with research awards and professional recognition in Canada, the United States, and the United Kingdom. She is an executive leader, consultant, educator in leadership, organization development, and systems change across private, public, nonprofit sectors, in addition to her groundbreaking book on transformation after trauma. She has authored peer-reviewed articles, book chapters, and another powerful book, Identities and Ancestries, a short story collection about global African experiences. As well, she is the lead editor of the We Will Lead Africa book series. With all of this behind her, Abound continues to research, write, and speak on leadership and organization development issues, post-traumatic growth, and on honoring diversity and social equality in her phrase, locally global world. She is adjunct faculty at Simon Fraser University, and as many of you know, she teaches in our Human Systems Intervention Master's Program at Concordia. So as a final note, I want to announce that Abound will be back. She will be back with us in spring of 2022 as part of the faculty facilitating a personal development laboratory entitled Developing the Organizational and Personal Self. And I think the dates, if you want to mark them in your calendar, May 1 through May 5, 2022, live in person. No more Zoom. So with delight and anticipation, here is Dr. Abound Gilpin-Jackson. Yay!
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, everyone. I'm going to have to try to match that enthusiasm, and although I'll just rely on my laugh for that. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the warm welcomes. I do not take for granted. It's already been a long day, and you're joining me in your evening in Montreal. In these times that we're living in, time is precious, and I'm well aware of that. We're all on Zoom. We all have long days, so thank you. Lots of gratitude for you joining to spend this hour and a half together, which I can guarantee you is going to go really quickly. So I am also really thrilled to be joining you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Kamloops and Siesmic peoples in British Columbia, an area, of course, that right now we all feel heavy-hearted, talking about the topic that we're talking about today, resonance and narrative, and facilitating transformation in traumatic times. I can tell you that I've had to put into practice the things I'm about to talk to you about in the last couple of weeks in my workplace, which is one of the biggest public sector organizations actually located, headquartered in Kamloops. So it hasn't been a fun couple of weeks for us. And then end to end, as I think about what happened in Ontario, in London, my mother happens to live in Ontario, and she is a Muslim woman. And so the past few weeks have felt very heavy end to end across the country. And so I named that partly also to name what I believe is the how critical the times we're in and the work that we all do. I know all of you, most of you, if not all of you, work in these spaces, but this work is so important in the world today for such a time as this. And so thank you for taking the time and being willing to be here, as I feel my voice already shaking. So here goes. I hope you can see my screen. Using slides is not my favorite thing, but in service of getting us through, thank you. I see that thumbs up. We'll get going. And just to warn you, there'll be background noise for a minute, because even though I warned them that I'm working, my children just walked in, par for the course as we work from home and do home from work in these days. So.
It's a crane. Don't fold it up and read it.
Thank you. All right, so I'm going to go right ahead then with this piece. Just to remind you, of course, other than me, so you'll have to bear with my children, because even though I knock the door, they'll close the door, they'll knock anyway. Please stay on mute, and then we will use the chat. Feel free to use it. You heard me locate where I am. If you can locate where you are, you're welcome to do that in chat. Also, I believe this is recorded. I think I saw that question in the chat. So just checking in with you, Jim and Marilyn, that is so?
Yes, yes, it is.
So just to confirm, and we will use breakout groups. So please, again, be prepared that we will go on a narrative journey today. So I know it's your evening, you might be eating, feel free to do that, but be prepared for the fact that we will use our breakout rooms today. And we will use Slido, which is web-based, so please have your phone or be prepared to use another tab in your browser. I'll let you know when we get to that. It should be pretty simple, hopefully, but just another way to help us have all our information in one place, because sometimes I find with Zoom chat, it's hard to scroll up and down. So we'll work through. This is what you were promised. It was in the information that went out, so I'm not going to go back over it other than to say I'm going to do my best in an hour and a half to get us through most of this, at least in a wine tasting kind of way, because talking about resonance and transformation and story and the depth that that can take us to is a lot to try to unpack to the depth that we can in 90 minutes. So we will fly over and we'll do our best. And so I'll just invite you to expect and accept some non-closure. There will be some of that, and to make the most of the time that we have together today. So just right off the bat, I know so many of you are in these spaces in human development, in the applied behavioral, social, and organizational sciences. Everything I'm going over today is all of that. So I just want to highlight that all of these perspectives that you see on the screen, including, as Jim introduced, taking that trauma-informed lens, is part of what I'm offering. These have all been part of my research and my discipline. The work that you're about to see is a very integrative lens. And so that's the place I come from. And so just naming it up front, because I won't speak to any of these in sort of theoretical depth, but know that these are all the lenses that inform the work that you're about to see. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to start with this concept of what's your story? What's your story? What's my story? And as I said, with the lenses that I come from, I believe firmly that we live in and through story. So I wanted to start by reading two pieces to you, one from a poetry volume that I love and that has a piece called Why by Julianne Okotsby-Tek, a fellow BC resident. She's been a writer in residence at Simon Fraser University. As mentioned, I'm adjunct there. She's quite involved in the University of British Columbia community where she went to school. And she has several pieces out. This piece, unfortunately, used to be on her website, and I noticed it wasn't there anymore. So I don't have the permission to share it, but I will read it. And then a second piece that I'll read comes out of the Encyclopedia of Leadership when they still made those. I noticed that the last one was in 2004, so there's not a current one, but I'll read you a snippet out of that to just anchor as we go through, as we talk about resonance and narrative. The medium through which both of those are realized is story. And so when I'm talking about story, I'm talking about it as an episode in a narrative arc, a narrative storyline. And again, my belief that we all live in and through story. We're born into a timeline of stories that we inherit. We contribute our own stories, and then we leave a legacy of story, whatever that is for us. And so I'll start by reading the poem Why, from Julianne Okotsby-Tek's The Mundane, the Sublime, and the Fantastical. We've fallen into story and inside story. This is all there is. This is all. We fall, we fall, we fall into lightness, into being, brightness into flight. This is all there is. This is all there is. This is all there is. This becoming. What they wanted us to be, coming into becoming, into being. Who are we? Who are we? Who are we again? Just take a pause. And if that evoked anything for you, feel free to put it in chat. Just pause for a second here. Thank you for doing that. The second thing I'm going to read to you, as I said, from the Encyclopedia of Leadership, talks about the role of narrative in leadership and organizations. And it reads like this. The philosopher Alistair MacIntyre calls humans the storytelling animals and asserts that narratives enable people to glimpse possible shared futures. Not only do humans tell narratives of their own, but they also continue narratives that others started before them and tell their narratives in competition with others. Thus, people come upon a page of a human narrative and have a chance to continue or to alter a story, but not to begin a new one. Nor can people shape their narratives without concern for an audience with whom they share a past. In this sense, humans, including leaders, have agency, the capacity to shape history, but they also have a shared history that has shaped them. I can only answer the question, what am I to do, if I can answer the prior question of what story or stories do I find myself a part. We enter human society, that is, with one or more imputed characters, roles into which we have been drafted, and we have to learn what they are in order to be able to understand how others respond to us and how our responses to them are apt to be construed. The questions, what am I to do, and of what story am I a part, capture the essence of leadership, to take action, which may exceed one's authority in the face of doubt. However, these questions miss the essence of leadership because they focus on the individual. Leaders ask and answer, what are we to do? Effective leadership asks implicitly or explicitly, of what story are we a part? Leadership imparts an immediacy of the shared past of many people and a possible future that influences people to build a link of action between the shared past and a possible future. I'll read that last one again. Leadership imparts an immediacy of the shared past of many people and a possible future that influences people to build a link of action between the shared past and a possible future. I believe we are here at that moment where we can make that link between the shared past we have inherited and many possible futures. At this sort of precipice and threshold of the COVID-19 pandemic worldwide, whether it is coming to grips with where we are in the storyline of systemic oppression, we are at that moment. And so that's what I'm inviting you into today, to take a gander through thinking about ourselves in that story and using these concepts of resonance and narrative, and to think about how we can facilitate that for the people we support, whether individual leaders, teams, or entire organizations and systems. So I'm going to invite you to either type into your screen slido.com, and I think you actually have to type sli.do, or if you can just go into your camera and grab the QR code, I believe it takes you straight there as well, right? It should take you straight there. And I'm just going to do something here real quick. On there, you should see an open text question that reads, what do they say about organizational life in the COVID-19 pandemic era? And I just want to qualify, when I say organizational life, I mean human organizing. So yes, you might think about formal workplaces that you support, but also think in terms of community organizations or community groups. But what do they say? What are we hearing about what they say about the state of organizational life today? I'll leave the QR code up on that screen. And then just invite you to type in, if you're in Slido, you should be seeing that, and you can type your response. Whatever comes up for you, don't censor, don't overthink, just type in your responses. I see them coming in, and I can see them on my screen here, and I'll show you them on the screen before we move off this. I'll read them as they come in. Adaptation, it will never be the same. More empathy. Disconnected, exhausted, lonely. Okay, they're coming in. Keep them coming. Just gonna get them up here. All right, can you see that on the screen now as they come in?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. All right, so I'll let you read them as they scroll through. They'll just keep scrolling through. Yeah. Yeah. Limited resources, isolation, some great. Everyone's working in how many? Too much screen time, friendly strangers. Just watch them as they come in. This is the zeitgeist of the context that we're living in. This is our current storyline. Just watch them as they come in for another couple seconds. Virtual fatigue, overwork, social, physical distancing, lower tolerance for bullshit. I love that one, whoever put it in there. Lost those weak ties, level playing field wherever we sit. The pandemic also exposed the ways we're unequal in society and the ways that inclusion, exclusion played out in the workplace or in society, and a lot of sentiment that maybe this has leveled things up somewhat, at least exposed it. Yeah. So keep them coming. We'll be able to see them on the screen. I'll bring them back as we need to, but that gives you a sense of what they say. So just a quick question, and I'll invite anybody that feels moved to just come on the mic and just quick responses. What's the impact as you see that picture that was coming up? And in fact, I'll bring it back up. What's the impact on you as you see that picture?
No, it's not a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
But,
No surprise.
But it makes definitely a moment of fear, like how are we gonna come to another side of this?
Yeah, it evokes fear as well. How are we going to get through this? Someone else, I'd love to hear 3 voices. Who else would like to come on the mic? Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for going first.
I can jump in.
Yes, please, Sonia.
I feel like in reading these that there's many overlapping, many varying, but also overlapping realities that everyone's experienced organizational life in COVID very differently, but also in a very overlapping kind of way.
Yeah. There are lots of overlap, our shared humanity in it. Yeah, in spite of the variance, for sure. One more person on mic.
Hi, my name's Jennifer. I feel a sense of overwhelm that there's a lot of incentive to create new ways of doing things, and yet there's also a lot of pressure and a lot of doom and gloom in a sense to get to those things. That there's not enough guidance, and yet we're supposed to have these solutions 5 years yesterday.
Yeah, yesterday. Let's figure out now what the workplace of the future is going to look like. Right. Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's heavy. It's overwhelming. It evokes some fear. And so in the world of unpacking narratives, I would ask, there's a number of things I would ask. I'm only going to ask one right now. I'll show you some of the other things. And many of you that do any form of narrative inquiry, narrative therapy will know this. But the one question I wanted to ask right now is, who is they that say these things? Who was the they? Come on, Mike. Who would like to respond? Who is they? I asked, what do they say?
Well, so for me, I interpreted they as being including myself, my family, and society as a whole.
Yeah.
That's how I was viewing. That's who I thought of as they when I was answering this question.
Fantastic. And actually, I just pulled up the chat. I see us. Thank you, Steve. Institutions, leaders, dominant society, the system, the workers. Yeah, you're all right. So it is society, it is organizations, and it is us. So somebody else said me. They is us. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the point here being that that when we're thinking in narrative, it's often easy to attribute they to everybody else. And part of the realization of working with narrative is reminding people that, you know, I asked you what they say, and you're the one who actually came up with these things. So they is us. We are all in it. This came from us. All right? This came from us. So here are some things we might do to unpack. What individual and collective narrative are we in? What are the fundamental beliefs and assumptions of this narrative? Where did the narrative come from? What is the impact of this narrative on me, on the whole, on the greater whole? And something I would do at this point is ask people to name this narrative. So give it a name. And so if I was working with a group right now, I would take time to say, let's just give it a name, and people will throw out some, and something usually sticks. So just think of something in your mind right now, and I'll just call it the COVID-19 pandemic narrative, just for expediency to move us through. So this is the COVID-19 pandemic narrative, and we are now tasked with figuring out now into the future what the world is going to look like and how we are going to support it. So seeing all these things, seeing the dominant narrative is all the things that you described. It evokes fear, it's overwhelming, and we need to take the time to unpack it, because that gives us that agency that I read out earlier. It gives us that agency that I talked about. It gives us a moment to look at it, to take the narrative and externalize it for a minute, to put it out here where we can talk about it and observe it. So part of the dominant narrative, the system we're in, is all these things. And for those of you who've heard me speak about, we're in that gray zone. We're in that gray zone between A and B, where we're going to be that's undefined and unknowable. And what I say about the gray zone is it's not simply VUCA. I know we're throwing volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's not only VUCA. What we need to also acknowledge so that we can prepare ourselves and others for addressing the challenges and the wicked problems of the current state, is understanding that the gray zone encompasses all of those things. It's complexity at the edge of chaos. It's all of it. And the sooner we accept that, the sooner we have agency to do anything about it. So the gray zone is all these things. It's transformation that is required in the way people work, think, and behave. It's a context where there's many questions, there's no clear answers, there are new things to consider regularly. The end goals and solutions are unknown. Processes and progress are emergent. Many people are involved and everything seems chaotic. And all of this evokes trauma. And that's why we need to be aware that the context evokes trauma. But if we're aware of that, we have agency. And when I say trauma, this is what I mean. It's events of seismic proportions that significantly challenge or invalidate our life worlds, okay? These events have an emotional quality to them. They have impact, and they impact us at every level, individually, organizationally, and societally. I'm just gonna tell them to quiet down here. Life in a pandemic. So they impact us on all these levels as well. But the thing that when I was doing research on this that we don't talk a lot about or as much about is organizational trauma. There's actually quite a few writers, probably no more than 5, that are writing specifically about organizational trauma. And the reason I call that out is in the current COVID-19 pandemic dominant narrative, the organization is central to that. We're all talking about what return to the workplace looks like as we've all been working from home. So we need to understand that organizational trauma, even though it's in our faces right now, is inherent in organizational life. Because of conditions that are less than ideal that we often tolerate. And as people who are working to facilitate transformation in traumatic times, we need to recognize when those traumatic times are showing up in organizations. For those of you who know Bayon's work, organization trauma is actually by one of the few people who've written about it for a long time, is being considered the 4th unconscious element of group life. So there's 3 that we commonly talk about. This is now being called the 4th unconscious element of group life, because we'd rather not talk about it. It could be an event or an accumulation of events. What we know is that it's something that has seismic impact, like the moment we flipped the switch and all of us were told, you work from home now, get on your computer and we'll figure it out, right? Seismic impact. It literally, and we know this, we use aphorisms like it rocked my world, right? We know that, but we'd rather not think about it. So we talk about it colloquially, but not when it's in front of us. These things challenge core fundamental beliefs of organizational life. And like I said, we can reduce functioning. So if you could just put in chat, and Marilyn, if you're there, if you don't mind reading some of these out, what are some other examples beyond COVID-19 that you can think of in organizational life that can cause traumatic impact? Again, organizational used broadly.
Massive layoffs, mergers, reorganizations, harassment, bullying, aggressions,
Yep.
Loss of important leader, toxic environment, abuse, death of a founder. Oh, there's a lot. Harassment,
Yep.
Gossip, program reviews, new government elected, gaslighting,
Mm-hmm.
persistent bias, lack of empathy, technical system failures, hacking, server failures, loss of data, racism, ableism, homophobia.
Yeah. So you get the picture.
Yeah.
Thank you. And scroll through those. Those are great examples. And you know, you're an audience that sees this and deals with this a lot. So no surprise, but very, very on point in terms of that list you came up with. So how do we prepare ourselves when we know all of that is happening, and we know people are having different emotions about this, and often our workspaces don't make space to process those things. They don't make space to acknowledge, to heal, and actually to do the proactive work to prevent these things from happening. So I always say at this point, my hope, my goal in my practice, what I work for, is that we are ahead of this, that we're doing what we can to create workplaces and conditions where we are not creating consistent and persistent organizational trauma. And we know that in society, especially in the world that we're living in now, and with our collective acknowledgement of systemic oppressions and systems that were designed to exclude and suppress parts of society, that there is trauma. And so we have to be trauma informed in how we do our work. I love bringing back this proverb. It's attributed to a North African country, one of those that's hard. It's hard to source the origin of exactly which country, so just to acknowledge that. A common saying that no matter how hard it may get, a way out or eventual comfort will be provided. After hardship comes relief, or always comes relief. It's not exactly translated right, but it basically means the cyclical nature of life, and that there are ups and downs, and trauma happens, hardship is a part of life, suffering is a part of life, but we also know that we will come out because life is cyclical. It's not only hardship. Well, it's not meant to be only hardship, and it's not meant to be only an upswing all of the time, because life happens. That's the actual sort of meaning behind it. So, so on that note, I know this is busy. I'm not going to go through it all, but what I'm going to say is the three things on the side is, if you were to take away the three key points here, is just the realization that when there are traumatic impacts, whether individual or group or organization, it is absolutely normal to experience that reduced functioning and that traumatic impact. We are human. We feel, we have emotions. We like to walk around like we're disconnected from our emotions. We're not. So that is an absolutely normal reaction. And so is resilience, where we tend to focus a lot of the organizational literature. Resilience, that ability to have the elastic to bounce back. What I remind people is bouncing back bounces you back to normal functioning. It doesn't necessarily bounce you forward. It's a necessary but insufficient condition for growth. Post-traumatic growth, which is an area of this literature that is growing, and part of my research background, post-traumatic growth and transformation are possible responses to trauma at all levels. But often, because that is not being considered, we focus on getting to resilience. Now, there's nothing wrong with resilience, and we need it. It's a necessary condition. But the way I describe it, like in the current context, I say to people, I don't want to bounce back to pre-COVID world. I don't want to be bounced back to a world that's even more unconscious about the ways that my story as a human in the world is not recognized, or the way our workplaces have created harm for people. I don't want to bounce back to that. I want to bounce forward. And that will require growth and transformation. And so think of post-traumatic growth and that possibility as a higher level of functioning, the ability to bounce forward. And so where does resonance come in? Resonance is what I describe as the heart of the learning zone required to evoke that growth and transformation. So again, those of you with that human development background and the applied social sciences background know that this zone between an event and a reaction and response is well researched, it's well talked about, you know, as far back as Piaget, historically, Keegan, Robert Keegan in current times. And I like to also bring forward Bani Saminang, who was my external thesis supervisor when I was a doctoral student, unfortunately passed away a few years ago, one of the leading educational psychologists on the African continent. All talk about this zone between an event and the meaning we make of it that allows us to respond from the place of resilience and growth instead of from the place of reaction. Because when we're immediately in this reduced functioning, we're reacting. And so we're in that sort of basal brain. We're in our fight or flight brain. So creating the space in order to respond from our higher order functioning requires something. And what I found in my research is this something that I've labeled resonance. And we're going to delve into that, and I'll give you an experience of it, and then we'll talk a bit more about it. But I'd like to bring the Viktor Frankl quote in here as well. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I like to remind people that Frankl wrote this literally, and the book, Man's Search for Meaning, that continues to be a bestseller, out of the experience of being in a concentration camp, and ultimately being a concentration camp survivor. We like to use the quote and often forget to bring back the context. It was out of that deep suffering that he brought forward this realization. As is many of the Nelson Mandela quotes that we tend to throw around, many of them came out of his 27 years imprisoned, fighting against apartheid in South Africa. And so what we're gonna do is delve into this idea of a resonance story. Because what I found is for people that were labeled as transformational leaders, when I did research with them, qualitative research, and unpacked their stories, I found that every single one of them had this thing that I labeled a resonance story. And in fact, they operated from that story. I guided them in what they were doing that was being labeled transformational. And so it's a personal account of a past life experience that deeply connects you to your identity and purpose. The key here, the difference, like I said, a lot of this work is putting together things that exist. I don't think it's really new. Our stories are as new as the first human or humans on the planet. So this is not new technologies or new thinking. What the realization and the nuance I want you to grab here is resonance stories are personal stories. They're life stories. What I realized going through the research and the interviews was they were not talking about like some leader out there giving them a vision. They were not talking about something external to themselves. They were talking about being motivated and inspired and having intrinsic purpose in something grounded in their life stories. And I'm using story, and I'll invite you into storytelling and sharing momentarily. But I just want to recognize as well, resonance stories were also symbolic. They were, they came in all the art forms. So they were everything from someone describing anchoring back to purpose the first time she decided to go back to dancing after having a traumatic, socially traumatic life experience, and deciding and being stuck in that rumination of post-traumatic stress. And then was invited into a dance routine, didn't want to do it, did it. And in the act of dancing, suddenly had these flashbacks to her pre-trauma self and the dream she wanted for her life, and decided she needed to go back to that. And that helped her make meaning and move forward. So it's symbolic. It's a drawing. For one person, they described walking by a picture that just evoked something for them. And they continue to talk about that picture in their narrative of themselves, their reauthored narrative of themselves. And so important to note, it's a remembrance from your own life, childhood, recent or far past, connection to purpose in life or in organizations. It's emotional. It's a story with a nostalgia trigger, and not necessarily positive or only positive affect. It's also the hard stories. It's also the negative or sad stories. The difference is making meaning of them in a way that anchors people to identity and purpose. And so this is what a resonance story looks like. This was the person I was describing earlier. Something in me had changed. I knew now that I could look forward and back without any regrets at the same time. The thing about resonance and people that anchor to it is they don't deny suffering. It's a holistic lens. So for those of us in the organization development spaces, it's, for example, not only taking that appreciative lens, but taking the time to support people to heal first and to go through their transition, letting them know we will go towards what are the possibilities and the opportunities, but let's just take time to surface where we're stuck, to talk about what's hard, to transition. And it's the art and science of knowing when to shift people from those stories into resonance and then into the possibilities of the future. So I'm going to take you on a short resonance and narrative journey here. What we're actually going to do is, first I'm going to invite you to just kick back, and I know you didn't come here to watch a YouTube video with me, but I'm going to ask you to to do that. This is the Heather Headley rendition, performance of the song Memory from Cats. Whether you like cats or not, this is not the point. What I'm going to invite you to look at in watching this is just be in the experience with her. Heather Headley is an amazing storyteller with voice and with song. So just watch the story. And then after this, I'm going to invite you into reflection on your own story and pulling up a story from your own life. So, and I just realized I may not have shared sound, so give me a second. Let me make sure that I do that. All right. Let me just minimize here and see who I can see. All right, if someone can just say yes, if you can hear in a moment.
Yep.
Lost her memory. She's smiling alone in the lamplight. The withered leaves collect at my feet, and the wind begins to moan. Beautiful then. I remember the time I knew what happiness was. Let the memory.
You need to share the video screen.
Every stream seems to beat.
Sorry, can you not see the screen? Sorry about that. I was sharing screen 1 and not screen 2. So I'll just put it back a tiny bit. There you go.
Not a sound from the pavement. Has the moon lost her memory? She is smiling alone in the lamplight. The withered leaves collect at my feet, and the wind begins to moan. Memory, all alone in the moonlight, I can smile at the old days. I was beautiful then. I remember the time I knew what happiness was. Let the memory live again. Every street lamp seems to beat a fatalistic warning. Someone mutters and the street lamp gutters, and soon it will be morning. In the daylight, I must wait for the sunrise. I must think of a new life, and I mustn't give in. When the dawn comes tonight, will be a memory too, and the new day will begin. The night the trees in summer, endless birds are making. Like a flower as the dawn is breaking, the memories are fading. Talks with me, and so easy to leave me all alone with the memory of my days in the sun. If you talk to me, you'll understand what happiness is. Look, a new day has
And so with all the power of that, and the way that we just watch the arc of going back to our younger selves in our memory or our present selves, it doesn't matter. Please journal briefly a story from your life during this past 18 months, this era we're living in, the COVID-19 pandemic era. A story that deeply connected you or connects you to meaning during these pandemic times. A story from your life that deeply connects you, a resonance story that deeply connects you to meaning during these times. So just invite you, your stream of consciousness. We'll take a minute for this. Then we'll invite you into breakouts to do some short story sharing in a story circle. All right. right, in a moment, I'm going to send you into a breakout room where you will have 15 minutes. So in that time, there should be 3 of you per room. Some of you are in a dyad, and that's okay. So you'll just have a bit more time. Actually, we'll do, just because we do have some dyads, we'll do 12 minutes. So I invite you to just be disciplined with the process. Again, expect and accept some non-closure. From what you wrote down, choose what you would like to share in that circle for 3 minutes if you're in a triad, and then if you're in a dyad, you have a bit more. So that means you'll go say hello, get into the room, say hello, and then each of you go around and share your story. So 3 minutes each, and then at the end of those 9 minutes, you'll have 3 minutes left. In those last 3 minutes, each of you, again, just go around and say what the gift of hearing each of the stories, of sharing and listening to stories has been to you. So what was the gift of being in that exchange? Really invite you to be in a speaking and listening exchange, honoring that you will be witnessing another human being's story. We are all story, and our stories are all unique and sacred. So as a speaker, please do share what you want to in your 3 minutes. Extend trust and vulnerability. Allow whatever is emerging for you to emerge. Try not to self-censor. We do that naturally. And then for those of you listening, please suspend judgment. Listen to be with the person. Listen to learn, not to fix, caretake, pile, anything like that. That's their unique story. You might connect and resonate with it, but it is the speaker's story, not yours in that moment. And just be a witness. That's what this is about. Be a witness to each other in this space. All right, can you see my screen? As folks come back, here we are. All right. So resonance stories. And actually, I think I will stop sharing my screen for a second. Just invite you to do a quick journal of how that was for you. And also, if you go back into Slido, there is a prompt impact of sharing your resonance story, if you don't mind responding there so we can see these. What was the impact of sharing your resonance story? It should still be open on your device. Externalize the deeply internal. Thank you. Keep them coming. A few more. Clarifying and grounding. Warmth and understanding, feeling connected and less alone. Hope helped me to see and feel common ground with another person. Went off on tangents that connected our stories together. That happens to unfinished, yes. Reflect on things that had been shut out. Growth, mutual feelings, and knowing that we are all one. Sharing personal experience and feeling connected. Keep them coming. I'll share my screen just for a moment so you can see them. I can tell you that I didn't even hear your stories, but I see and hear these words all the time when I do this work in this way in any of the systems that I support. That shared humanity. And for those of you that work with transformative learning, you know that moment that you move from meaning making to that sense of a shared connection is part of the process, and it's part of the journey. And certainly is one of the outcomes that leads to transformation. That knowing that I'm not alone, so I can be supported to try the crazy thing, or I can be supported when I'm feeling stuck because I can go to the community that understands all of those things. And so, just to start to wrap this together, here's how resonance played into the image I had shown earlier. That moment of awakening through personal story that opens space for creating an opportunity for transformative learning. Imagine if we took the time to hear, not in the organic ways that we do now, because I'm sure we do hear the personal stories when it's opportune or when it happens organically, but to be systematic about asking people, what's a personal story about why DEI, for example, matters to them. We often don't ask that meaning-making question. We just assume that people will see why it matters and come along for those of us that want to facilitate that work. So imagine if you have people deeply connect personally and that then scale that to the team level and say, what does this mean for us then as a collective? So resonance creates that role of opening up the space that leads people to go beyond resilience and into that growth and transformation zone. It's the opportunity. It doesn't mean you'll automatically move there. It does require some work. What I have found is that it sparks transformation in terms of connecting people to purpose, to humanity, shared humanity. That was clear in your responses just now, to an added level of growth. And I'll show you also there's a narrative development model that fell out of this work as well. I wasn't looking for one, but it was very clear and it was there because people do develop further. They see themselves beyond individual and even beyond social community, but even in a planetary sense. And looking for what's my contribution. So any of you that care about climate change and climate risk, what's your resonance story about that? Why does that matter? And how can you anchor to that when the going gets tough? Because we all know it will. So, so resonance with the correct space for disclosure. We're talking a lot about psychological safety. I talk a lot about brave space. It is not always psychologically safe for those of us with certain intersectionalities in society to speak up. It's risky, it's scary, but with the right trusted space for, well, with brave space and knowing that there's enough opening that I can be courageous to speak up, that sometimes is enough. And the meaning making and insight that that affords once you lock on the resonance story, all of this is possible and that transformative learning will fall out. That is what leads to sustained action. And again, that's the distinction here, sustained action. This is not about one-off, it's about sustained action. So facilitating for this is about 3 arcs, and these are the arcs that I worked through. I do believe that facilitating for resonance and transformation is inherent in our roles. If you are a change agent or facilitator of any kind, it's become inherent because we are swimming in these times and we know that we have choice and opportunity to support people through. So how do you help people understand the trauma narratives? Some of what we did briefly with what they say, where there's lots of ways to do that deeply and unpack that. Watch for the moment to transition to connect to resonance. Moment where you don't want people to be so overwhelmed, you know, that you lose people, that people disconnect or bifurcate, because that also is normal. If it's too hard, it's hard for us to integrate. So you watch for the point where you help people transition to connect to resonance and unpack their personal stories that connect to the issue. And then and only then, in my experience, or at least in this version of my work, do I move people to uncover the possibilities and look beyond to what are we creating? What can we author together? Because if we are part of a storyline, as I read in the beginning, we can alter the story. We can create, we can reauthor our stories in new ways, fully in the context that we're sitting in, acknowledging that, not that that context should debilitate us, but we need to understand that context so that we can move forward to alter it and to create something new. So these are the 3 arcs. There's a number of methodologies that I have put together. I am actually, what I often say is I'm methodology agnostic. If you have methodologies that work well to unpack trauma narratives, use it. If you have methodologies that work well for resonance, to evoke resonance, I often ask, use the story stem, because it's intentional, it's been crafted, and I've been using it over these 10 years. So use the story stem. But if there's different ways to evoke stories, so for example, in helping people unpack resonance, I take it deep. I say, what's a symbol that represents this? And then I work with teams, they name the new narrative, the alternative narrative, that's the new one that they want to create in light of their resonant stories. That's when we're at this point of possibility. And then we go deeper. We're like, what's a symbol? What's a narrative? How will you know when you're falling out of this narrative back into the COVID-19 pandemic narrative? Someone called that narrative the scream. How would you know you're falling back into the scream? And how do you let go of the scream and stay present in what you're creating? We did story circles today, and I've used some of what I use in the Transforming Organization Trauma process, which really follows this arc in an organizational or large team sense. So I wanted to show you, these are some examples from flip charts from a number of years ago now that I had asked for permission in this particular workshop to use in when I do these talks. You can see here the name of their dominant narrative prior, and then you can see the name of their collective reauthored narrative afterwards. So I just wanted to show you that as an example. This was anchored in them doing resonance stories, working through that, and then unpacking and building on the resonance story. So we unpack it and then we say, okay, what are you building? How do you thicken this? How do you create that alternative narrative to the dominant one? And then how do you sustain it? And when you're feeling low on energy, how do you anchor to your resonance stories? How do you come back to a space where you can connect and share stories and come back to center on resonance? This is another frame. I think one of the pre-reads had an older version of a process I had put together to sort of show what facilitating through a transformation process looks like with resonance centered. And this version, I often say, you know, even if it's not necessarily, we don't have to call everything trauma unless it really is traumatic, but even if it's just a complexity where people are feeling stuck and not able to move, then using this kind of process works as well. You can see how much resonance story is repeated in here, but again, the arc is the same, helping people understand what are we trying to achieve together, what's the purpose, what's negotiable and non-negotiable, what are our personal stories, and what's the collective story around this. And that's all about initiating that transformation. And then facilitating the journey, helping them define and move from current state narratives to through their resonance stories. So it's always okay through the lens of your resonance stories, which tells you, gives you a purpose, right? Because we do resonance stories and then we go, okay, based on that story, what purpose can you craft for yourself? And then the whole, through that lens, how do we create that? How do we create that in this workplace or in the world? And then moving into actions. What I find, at least my experience is, I'm finding, for example, if we take DEI work, lots of people dropping into, oh, we need to understand the context, and doing all these learning sessions or storytelling sessions that are really opening up raw and difficult narratives for people. But they're doing this without the understanding of when to move to resonance before going to systemic change possibilities. So what I find is if people do this and only this, again, it is necessary, but it's not sufficient. And in fact, it can sometimes cause more harm than good. Or I'm finding people are going here, this is the realm of systemic change. Let's look end to end on the people systems and let's change everything with a DEI lens. That's good. But if you do it without fostering these conversations for learning and connecting people to personally why this matters, and then in the collective, what's our resonance, what I find then is you create a context that lends itself towards compliance. People are now like, oh, this is optional, I can do it if I can. And, you know, otherwise, you know, we call the resistance word out at that point. People are resisting. Well, maybe, but maybe they also have unmet needs. Maybe you have haven't heard them. Maybe they haven't had time to express and heal from the narratives they're stuck in, or to have those acknowledged so that they can come along. So that's at least been my experience in it. Some things to be aware of. Of course, this needs to be held carefully and done well. And these are all things to pay attention to, mindful that this is a deeply humanizing experience that we often don't do in organizations. So I advocate that we do it. Just be mindful of holding people well. And then this is where I was going to end. I won't send you to breakout for this, but this is another one of the methods I use that centers resonance. So what I'll invite you to do right now is just to do it in a journaling sense. So if you would, I'll go off screen and I'll give you the prompts. Thank you. I can't see the chat when I have the slides up. Yes, DEI, immense diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you for clarifying and working with each other in the chat there. So if you would take a moment to journal based on the overview I just did, the really quick experience you had of sharing a resonance story through that lens, based on what that story evoked for you in the context of our COVID-19 pandemic narrative, what needs to be transformed in your context? What needs to be transformed? Just take a couple seconds to journal that. What needs to be transformed? Stream of consciousness, bullets are fine. Just make some notes about what's your interior state as you put that down. I would say go to the thing that is most heart-racing for you. So just notice your interior state, notice your emotions. How do you feel about what you have written down about what needs to be transformed? And then just one action, first action. Of course, transforming action in itself as a resonance tool is something I can do over half a day or a day with a group. So this is just one thing that it sparked for you that you might do as a next step for yourself. This is just for you. So I'll just share a few last things. If you were facilitating this for transformation in a traumatic context or just in a highly complex context, this is a version of what I might do in a Zoom room so that it's not, you know, you do the journaling, but also again, that practice of witnessing is part of evoking and thickening resonance. So you would share it, others would listen, and then they would provide back an insight or ask a transformational question to help you to continue to build and grow that narrative. Often I've done transforming action. So for example, I was in healthcare for 10 years and as even before COVID, there's many things that can be complex and traumatic in healthcare. So depending on what groups we're working with, often we will have a practice of bringing those groups together regularly, and we'll forward a piece of work that we had committed to, and then we will continue to check in with transforming action. Where are we now? What needs to be transformed? How are people feeling? What's our interior state? What action is needed now? So again, those of you that use adaptive action, what, so what, now what, it's a version of that. But the practice is also saying it out loud and letting other people reflect back and offer you further transformative questions. The thing about it is it's often you can do it with people in different groups as well. And so that reflecting back helps forward you, but also is clarifying for the listener. So that's one way in terms of how you might do it. Here are the takeaways. Trauma is an unconscious element of group life that we react incoherently to, or we can respond in transformational ways. That is an option. Resonance is a takeaway. It's a moment of awakening. It's anchored in story. How can you consistently use story in your practice? Transformation is a possible outcome of trauma, and facilitating for resonance, I believe, is core to OD. In there, I mean organization development practitioners, and I mean that broadly in this context. So as a colleague and human, I often use this tagline, make resonance conscious and hang on to it. I have a couple of resonance stories that I use in different ways that really anchor me. It might be in that interaction that where I feel I just experienced a microaggression. I just pause and remember my identity based on my resonance story, ground myself, and choose how I respond. It could be in a bigger context in the work I do in the world. There certainly are the resonance stories I have that motivate me. One is a picture of my younger self that I often carry around with me. So find yours and hang on to it. Lean into the supports that give you hope in these times. Lead the change you want to see in the world. We all have agency. We have an opportunity to alter the narratives that we are in. And then if you're interested, I know a couple of people on the call were part of the special issue journal for the Organization Development Review. And we did some issues on what organization development practice looks like in these transformative and traumatic times. There are 2 issues. So shout out to you, Gloria and Adel, that have articles in those issues. And it's worth grabbing and having. It's a subscription-based journal, and I know there's conversations to see how to get it to this community, but Adel and Gloria, I'm sure you're more than happy to share yours, which is possible. And I'll actually, I'll share the issues with you, Marilyn, just for the people who attended this this session. So before, I'll just open it up. I know we're close to close, or we're right at the minute. So if you don't mind, again, in Slido, just put your one word of where did this session take you? I really appreciate seeing, and it will bring up a bit of a word cloud. So give me a second. I will go and open that one up. I appreciate it if you can just leave one word. You'll see that come up. One word to describe your experience of this rather quick journey through resonance. I see those coming. Thank you. I will show it on the screen. Or you can see my screen, in fact, I think, yeah? Try that again. I think you can see my screen there.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm on 2 screens, I'm sure you've noticed, so it has its perils, but it's useful. Gratitude, hopeful, curiosity, inspired. Thank you. Keep them coming. Resonancing. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop this share just because I'd love to see your faces as I say bye. I will stay on the screen in the room. I'm happy to stay behind for a few minutes if anyone wants to ask a question. Marilyn, there's questions about the presentation slides. I will share a version of the slides with Marilyn, and I believe she'll share them out by tomorrow. I'll do that shortly after this, and I'll share those special issues. I do ask that you use them only for you. It is a subscription-based journal, and happy to offer it in this group.
Well, I'd like to take a few moments to just say a few words, if I may.
Absolutely.
So
over to you. I'm done.
Thank you so much, Yabom. Hi, everyone. I'm Marilyn from the administrative assistant at the center. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. I see that we have people joining from all over. Thanks to many for your acknowledgement of the territories you're living on these days. We hope you enjoyed tonight's presentation. On behalf of the center, I would like to thank Dr. Yabom Gilpin-Jackson for her prolific work and for today's very reflective presentation.
Were there any questions I could answer for anyone?
I mean, I kind of had a question, but I don't know if it's an answerable question. But when you were talking about, you know, our past stories and like building to go forward,
yeah,
is it possible to build with people that don't have the same past story? Because we might either have different versions of it or not the same experiences in our past. And like if you are in an organization where people do not have a common story,
yeah,
is that even worth spending time in?
Right, right. I think I know what you're saying. I think what you're describing is how do I build an alternative story from the margins? It's a hard place to be if it's not a shared narrative. There's always an opportunity to build an alternative story. So it looks like, how do you find support and community outside that dominant? It's basically walking, creating an alternative from the edge, right? It's edge walking is what bell hooks called it, right? It's good old bell hooks. It's leading from the margin and edge walking. How do you walk the edge? You find your own community, you find your supporting community, and sometimes you make a hard choice. Okay? It's not easy or simple. I'm being simplistic, but I think that's what you're describing.
Yeah, because didn't you mention chaos at the precipice, right? Or chaos.
Complexity at the edge of chaos.
Complexity at the edge of chaos. So then it's also feels turbulent. Anyways, thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for the question.
Yvonne, thank you ever so much.
Pleasure. Thank you for coming.
And let me ask you, this learning from the edge, is there something that we could read that would give us some points to do something very difficult? And I think we're probably all doing something like this in our own way. And it's difficult.
Yeah, I think there's two parts to it. One is really the people I learned from, i.e. my research participants that led to this work years ago now that I've continued to build on. Part of the idea, and if I think back to some of how that plays out, is almost that sense of I can't rely on anybody else, and it is hard, and it is going to keep being hard. So what are my personal and community resources that I can find that support me? So it's a similar answer to what I just said. I write about it in the work about this, so it's written in the book by a similar name, but also on edge walking specifically. That was written in the context of being a marginalized person in the system. So, and it was specifically written from a Black woman's identity perspective. But there's much to learn there. So I'm happy to. I was looking at it recently. I actually have some of the older articles by bell hooks and people who wrote about it after that describe this idea of edge walking. So if that is helpful, I'm happy to flip it as well. It feels very specific. I don't think it needs to go to everybody, because if they hadn't heard this, it may not make sense. So I'm happy to send it to you, Marilyn, if you want to share it with
Steve. Thank you.
Or if anybody else wants it, they can let you know.
Yeah, I'd want it too. So, I mean, I've read bell hooks, but I guess I never read her organizational stuff.
And the particular one I'm thinking about is in a book, and I'm not going to remember the book's name, but I'm sure you can Google and find it. The article, I have it, I just pulled it up, is Marginality as a Site of Resistance. And I don't actually even think it's a whole chapter. It might just be her forward in the book. I'm not remembering clearly. I'll have to go look it up. But the title is Marginality as a Site of Resistance. And that's what you're describing. If the collective are not there, if I'm on the margins, if I'm on the outside, how do I still do my thing and have agency, right? I think that's the one I was looking for. And then negotiating self, yeah. Insider, outsider, but this is from a research lens. There's a insider, outsider research. Negotiating self at the edge of the emic and etic divide.
I have a question about pushback. In your research, bringing resonance storytelling and sharing, and you talked also about psychological safety. So when sharing our own stories, I mean, it takes a lot to take that first step, right? What has been your observation about pushback, and what can you do about that? Because I think of a lot of people I know who are more science and math oriented and not so much into creative arts type things. So just looking inward for a story can be.
So when you say pushback, what do you mean in terms of when you're facilitating?
Yes, exactly.
I just don't make a big
do
deal of it. Yeah, I just don't make a big deal of it. I don't even describe it in half the terms I just described. I just put it into the process. Generally, I do see stunned faces. Generally, do people do it? Yeah.
So stunned, but they still do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And you know what? In this work too, I'm also aware that sometimes these stories are hard. And if someone is not ready to share, that's okay, they can pass. But what has been my experience is people do it. I haven't had a lot of people ask to pass because we're living in a context where people don't have this opportunity every day. So I do think beyond the shock, people do step into it. There's the, thank you, Warren. He's so good. Is he here still? I see
the background. Yeah.
You just, I must be hiding non-video participants.
No, I'm here.
Yeah, you're there.
I just thought I'd find it.
Thank you. So
Beals, it's by Beals.
Beals, and she quotes bell hooks.
And actually, no, ironically, I know her. I'm a Facebook friend of her in New Zealand.
Oh, awesome.
I met her at a qualitative inquiry course, and I didn't know she wrote that.
Oh, okay, awesome. Awesome.
Oh, I just had one quick clarification. You said to use the story stem, and I just wanted to know if you could clarify it so I'm not misinterpreting it. When you say use the story stem,
it will be in the slides. It's the how I introduce resonance stories, which is I know it's a mouthful, but I have found it effective because you know what, the most transformative questions are ambiguous. They're not simple. So it is the story stem of what is a story from your life. It will be in the slides, you will see it, and then there's a dash that
okay, so that's what you mean by story stem. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It will be in the slides.
Okay, thank you.
All right, 1 more minute. Leave at 4:15.
Merci, Abom. Thank you so much.
A pleasure. Thank you for joining.
I'm just looking forward to know when we can register for next year.
I don't actually know. So Marilyn,
I'll ask.
I think that's your question. I don't know.
I hope there's more than just 20 spots because I want to register too.
Yeah, exactly. I hope there is quite.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Yvonne. Thanks for your generous.
My pleasure. Thank you for staying. Thank you, everyone. Marilyn, I'll send the follow-up.
Yeah.
Be well, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.